Hello and welcome back. I'm Elizabeth and this is Time Scholar and I'm very happy to have you here today. So today I'm going down more of a modern history route instead of ancient history. So this week I will be talking about Amelia Earhart, and not just her famed world trip that I think is what everybody now knows her for, but also her early life and where her love of flying really came from. Amelia Earhart was more than just a pilot. She did a lot for women as well, being born in the late 1800s, in 1897, and she did a lot with her life, writing books, speeches, and is memorialised worldwide for all of these things she did, as well as her absolute achievements in aviation. So if that is something that you'd like to listen to, sit down, relax, grab a cup of tea, and stay tuned. Amelia Earhart was a famed female pilot born on the 24th of July in 1897 in Kansas in the United States. She is known as one of the most famous and inspirational figures of early aviation, especially for women, as, despite growing up at a time when very few women actually had careers, Amelia Earhart had one. Women weren't flying airplanes, and yet she was breaking the mold by doing that herself. The idea, sort of the domestic ideal, was still very much in place when Amelia Earhart was growing up as well, which really sort of helped set her apart in what she was doing. It was in the 1930s that she really reached her worldwide acclaim, being known for her daring flights. But she wasn't just a pilot either. Amelia Earhart became a symbol of female empowerment. At a time when flying was still incredibly dangerous and was very male-dominated, she proved that women could do just as much, if not sometimes more, which is something she proved out with her flying as well, with the speeches she gave, the books that she wrote, and even the teaching that she did at Purdue University as well. She gave these speeches all over the world and was an inspiration all over the world. She did not just stand as a woman in aviation, but she also, in herself, represented a shift in ideas surrounding what women could do and what women were told they could do. So Amelia Earhart had a rather non-traditional upbringing for the time period in which she was born in. She was the daughter of Edwin Stanton Earhart, who was a legal representative for various railroads, and Amelia, Amy, Earhart, formerly Otis. And Amelia Earhart was not really interested in regular ladylike things. Instead, she had interest in sports and science. It is said that she absolutely loved basketball, for instance, which really highlighted her independent streak from a young age, especially with what was expected of women in the early 1900s as well. Earhart also had a sister, 2 years her junior, called Grace, who in her later years, teenage years, started to go by her middle name, Muriel. So before 1909, Amelia Earhart and her sister Muriel were homeschooled, but they later enrolled in public school when Amelia was 12. She had some struggles in her early life as well, which, did affect her even in her adulthood, with her father being forced to retire in 1914 due to his problems with alcohol, and it was at this time that her grandmother also passed. So, due to this and other reasons as well, Earhart and her sister jumped around schools. She started at Central High School in St. Paul, Minnesota as a junior, but finished her education at Hyde Park High School in Chicago in 1916, after having moved there with just her mother and her sister, this time without her father. So towards the end of World War I, Earhart received training as a nurse's aide in the Red Cross in 1917, and she actually did this in Canada and Toronto whilst visiting her sister. She worked with the voluntary unit as well, and it is at this time that she heard stories from military pilots, which started to sort of pique her interest in flying. She also helped out with nursing duties in 1918 over the course of the Spanish influenza pandemic as well, actually contracting the disease herself, but she made a completely healthy and fine recovery. And it was a year after this that she was prepared to start Smith College, but instead changed her mind and she decided to go to the University of Columbia in order to do medical sciences. But she actually quit her studies in this a year later as well. It was in 1908, at the age of 10, that Amelia Earhart actually saw her first plane at an aviation fair, and it's safe to say that she was not at all impressed by any means. It is even quoted that she said, "It was a thing of rusty wire and wood, and looked not at all interesting," which is incredibly ironic considering what she went on to do later in her life. It wasn't until 1920, so after all of her sort of talking with military pilots in her work with the Red Cross and being a nurse, and all of those stories as well, that all of this thought around flying really changed for her. It was when a pilot, Frank Hawks, who actually later gained fame as an air racer, took her on a flight, And this flight cost her $10, which I'm not entirely sure of what the conversion rate of 1920s US dollars to modern day pounds would be, but I'm considering it would be a fair bit of money now today. And it was this flight that really ignited the flame in Earhart, that made her think that this is what she wanted to do. She needed to fly. And it was the month after this that she actually got herself a flying instructor, working various jobs in order to save the $1,000 for these lessons, which again I'm sure would be far more money than I think it is today if I was to look up the conversion rate. And she started learning in 1921 and very quickly started breaking records. On October 22nd, 1922, Earhart flew to an altitude of 14,000 feet, which is 4,300 miles, which set a world record for female pilots. And although today that doesn't seem like much, like we've got, planes that can go to 30, 40, 45,000 feet, but at this time there was no pressurized cabins, it was just her in her plane, 14,000 feet off the ground. It was an absolutely amazing feat of aviation. And then in May of the following year, 1923, she became the 16th woman in the history of the United States to be issued a pilot's license, which is absolutely insane. So even before she got her pilot's license, she was breaking records, and then once she got it, being the 16th woman, so again, just her independence was there, and she was breaking gender norms as well. She just went on to break more and more records. She was really an absolute feat in aviation. And it was in 1928 that Amelia Earhart became the first woman to cross the Atlantic by plane. It was on the 17th of June this year that she achieved this goal, taking off from Newfoundland and landing in Wales after 21 hours of flying. This wasn't a solo trip though, and it wasn't really what she had envisioned when she originally went about this. Instead, she was more of a passenger, claiming that she felt like baggage, like a sack of potatoes alongside her two male counterparts. But this was the flight that really propelled her to international stardom. And it was from this moment that her life really started to revolve around flying. And it was also the time that her future husband entered the picture and her life, and they were married in 1931, while she was preparing for her Atlantic crossing. On May 20th, 1932, Earhart took off from Newfoundland to Paris. However, the weather meant that she was forced to land in Ireland, so a bit off base, some may say. But despite this somewhat failed attempt, it was amazing. The fame that had followed her was so much that even the airfield she landed on got rushed, and she had to be taken away by police. And the word of this flight spread, and she was even given a gold medal from the National Geographic Society from the incumbent, president at the time. It's very clear I live in the UK. And she was only on the up as well. So in January of 1935, she was the first person to fly solo across the Pacific from Honolulu to California. And later that year, she was the first to fly solo from Mexico City to Newark. Her fame was only growing at this point. She was becoming an absolute staple in aviation and long-haul flying. And it was in 1937, as Earhart neared 40, that she really wanted a challenge. She wanted to be the first woman to fly around the world. And the preparation started for what would be, unbeknownst to her, Amelia Earhart's final flight. So after a failed attempt at this flight earlier in the year, Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan departed from Miami on June 1st, beginning their 29,000-mile journey across the world, which is just an insane amount of miles to think. I thought I moved far from home when I moved 550 miles away. I can't even fathom 29,000 miles. They had over 30 planned stops for fuel and supplies, and by the time they landed in New Guinea on June 29, 1937, they had completed 22,000 miles, so they were only 7,000 miles short of their goal by that point. Noonan had been struggling though, with many inaccurate maps making it difficult for him, especially with their next flight, which was a 2,556 mile trip from New Guinea to Holand Island. It was incredibly difficult for him with these inaccurate maps as well, especially since the weather hadn't been great for them either, and he was really a celestial navigator. He loved to use the stars as well. So on July 2nd, 1937, Fred Noonan and Amelia Earhart took off, well rested, freshly loaded with fuel and supplies. And it is also important to note that they actually removed every unnecessary object from the plane in order to allow for more fuel on the flight, just in case, because the island that they were planning to land on is a very small, flat strip of land in the Pacific Ocean. So in case they needed to, go into land again, they made sure that they had an extra over 200 litres of fuel on board as well. The expected flight time was 20 hours, accounting for the time difference, the crossing of the international date line, and Earhart was also given help by the US Coast Guard, with a radio contact being stationed just offshore of Holand Island, and there were 2 other ships positioned with all of their lights on along the flight route as markers. It was known that this was going to be a difficult stretch of their journey. They had let the Coast Guard know, and they were having as much help as they could have, really. And as they flew, Earhart contacted the ITASCA, who were the radio people of the Coast Guard. Please forgive me if I'm wrong, but that's how I understood them in my research. And she reported cloudy weather, which again was making it difficult for Noonan, as he was such a celestial navigator. And then later, she also asked the ITASCA to take bearings on her. And this was followed by a steady stream of transmissions from the ITASCA, but she couldn't hear them, so it's known that her radio transmissions must have been irregular throughout her flight, which was just the first in a series of unfortunate events. So it was at 7:42 that the ITASCA picked up a message from Earhart, which was, "We must be on you, but we cannot see you. Fuel is running low. Being unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet. And then, just over an hour later, at 8:45, she reported, "We are running north and south." And that was the last message received from Earhart's plane. So after this last message, and after everybody realizing that the Electra, Amelia's beloved plane, was missing with her and Noonan in it, a rescue attempt started. And this attempt is still one of the extensive, if not the most expensive, air and sea searches in US naval history. But over a 2-week search that covered 250,000 square miles of ocean and costing $4 million, which is the equivalent to just over $89 million today. So it was an absolutely insane, search. No expenses were spared in the search for Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. But the government stopped the operation after these 2 weeks. Earhart and Noonan were lost, and their fate was unknown. And then, a year later, in 1938, a lighthouse was constructed on Holand Island in Amelia Earhart's memory. So in the report from the US government surrounding their disappearance, they concluded that the plane must have just run out of fuel and crashed into the ocean. It seemed to be the only reasonable explanation as to what had happened. And this was further concurred later on, I think in the 1980s or 70s from memory, by Lawrence Safford, who was a retired US Navy captain, who concluded that the fight failed due to poor planning and execution, which is somewhat up for debate with some researchers, as her flight path has been studied, and they seem to have everything planned out. There are over 30 stops for fuel and supplies. It must have been a problem in air, in my opinion, rather than a planning issue sort of in their immediate kind of flight path idea. And this thought actually from Safford is also held up by many researchers who believe that Earhart and Noonan died during or shortly after the crash as well. And it's believed by many that the ship lays at the bottom of the ocean, by some even 18,000 feet below, like the ocean line. And the searches for Amelia Earhart and her plane did not stop when the US stopped in 1937. So in the early 2000s, in 2003 and in 2006, David Jordan searched a 1,200 square mile area around where it is believed that she crashed, but he did not find any wreckage. And then in 2019, Robert Ballard led an expedition to locate wreckage, but he also didn't find anything. And this was also the case in 2024 for Tony Romeo, who also went and tried to look for any wreckage there as well. But actually, as of last week, so on the 2nd of July 2025, which is 88 years to the day that Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan went missing, there is a new mission to solve the mystery as to what happened to them and what happened to her plane, the Electra. A group of US researchers have launched a new mission following clues that has led them to a remote island in the Pacific where they think Amelia, Noonan and the plane may have crashed. So rather than believing now that it is in the bottom of the ocean somewhere, this new research has led them to believe that it was actually an island that they crash landed on. So there's been new satellite imagery which is believed to show part of her plane protruding from the sand on a very remote island in Kiribati. I'm very sorry if I pronounced that wrong, which is about 1,000 miles from Fiji. The team that is looking for Earhart is actually from Purdue University, so the university in which she did teach at for a while. And this university also contributed to the funding for her original flight in 1937. The mission is due to take place in November of this year, so November 2025, and they hope to find the remains of the aircraft. And if they do, they want to bring it back to Purdue University in order to teach more students in aviation, but also as a memorial to Earhart and everything that she did for women in aviation, and also just for flying in general. So overall, I think that Amelia Earhart was an absolute weapon in aviation, especially for the time period in which she was alive and she was flying. She did so much for women's rights as well. She was a supporter of the Equal Rights Act in the US, and she kind of did prove to everybody that she could do what she wanted to do, even things like she cut her hair short in the style of many other female aviators at a time when women were expected to marry and have children. That entire sort of domestic ideal was still very strong in the early 1900s. Like, if you think about in the UK, that was the end of the Victorian era, so all of those ideas are still very, very strong. But she did so much for aviation, she did so much for women, but it is very interesting that she did kind of just disappear without a trace. There is so much sort of mystery, and not to sound like conspiracy theorist, but there is a lot of mystery surrounding her disappearance and the crashing of her plane as well. But I also think it is important to remember Fred Noonan. Like, even in my research, talking to my dad as well, he didn't even realise she had a navigator with her. So when that plane crashed, it was not just her, but it was also Noonan who went down as well. And I don't know, it's just very important, I think, to remember, because it also means that she wasn't alone in those final moments, which I think, obviously no one knows, but may have given her some solace as well. So, all in all, I think Amelia Earhart is an absolute, mission of a woman. She did so much in her short 40 years of life as well. But yeah, that's my video for you today, and I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like and comment and subscribe. It really helps out my channel if you do. And if there is anything you would like to know in particular, ancient history or modern history or anything in between, make sure to comment it below and I will do my best to research it and put a video together for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.